Okay, hello. My name's Charlotte Jeffery-Abt. Janine neglected to introduce me. I know, how rude. It's fine, I work with her. And the title of my talk is Raising the Dead, a Paleontologist's Tale. So I'm a paleontologist. You might think it's strange then that I start off with a slide that says, imagine a world without fossils. So imagine a world without fossils. It'd still be a pretty colourful place. I'd be sad I wouldn't have a job. There'd be no Jurassic Park. That's sad too. But we would, if we thought about this world, there are many things we would understand. So we would understand something about evolutionary history a little bit, because we'd be able to see how things are happening in the present day. We could look at the evolution of diseases, for example. We could look at the mechanisms by which things evolve, but we'd have no direct evidence of what had actually happened in the past. So we might think, for example, that fish are the simplest organisms that there are, the simplest vertebrates that there are, but we'd have no evidence to show us that they were the earliest vertebrates that we actually had found. So we could make all sorts of speculative guesses about the history of life on the planet, but actually we wouldn't have that much data to back it up. So I think a world with fossils is a happier place. Here's just a few examples of some very pretty fossils. You imagine a world without fossils, we'd know about no extinct organisms at all. So we wouldn't know about these beautiful ammonites, trilobites, and dinosaurs. So a fairly sad and depressing world, I think you'll think that is. So enough about fossils. Or what about me? It's always about me, isn't it? Okay, so here I am. I think I was about 5 in this picture. So always a natty dresser, as you can see. Great hairstyle. It was the 70s. Yeah, that's my sister as well. So this is me discovering what I believe was probably the first fossil that I found. So this is, I grew up, my dad was an engineer, so I grew up all over the world. And this is in the Libyan desert, and it's a fossilized tree trunk. So you might think it's actually quite a straightforward journey. Obviously was fairly interested, or maybe I'm looking off into the distance at something else, I'm not sure. But you might think it's a fairly straightforward journey from a kid who's interested in fossils at a young age to actually becoming a paleontologist. But I'm easily distracted, so it didn't happen quite as you might expect. So I was always interested in the natural world. So as a kid, I would be running around picking flowers, asking for flower identification books for my birthday, picking up shells on the beach. And I was interested in how the natural world worked, why valleys were different shapes. But basically anything that was to do with the natural world, I wanted to understand how and why. And that seems to be actually a theme that we've heard from all of our speakers today. So at school, I had the attention span of a gnat. And so I was interested in absolutely everything. So I was interested in sciences and arts and languages and everything. And trying to decide on what A-levels to do, I thought, well, if I do sciences, I guess I can always pick up a book and read it at a later date. Maybe I can learn a language when I'm a bit older as well. But I think for science, maybe I'm going to need some help with some of these ideas. So I chose to study physics, chemistry, and maths at A-level. The thing that really stood out for me, I think the first thing that blew my mind, if you like, was the idea of crystallography. So the idea that if you have all these atoms, they arrange themselves in the same way, and then you get a pretty crystal that always looks, so salt crystals always look the same as each other. That's phenomenal. It's like an amazing thing. And so I just thought, crystallography, I want to do that. That's how I want to spend my life. Well, how do you spend your life being a crystallographer? So I kind of cast around for ideas of what I might want to do. I didn't have any kind of grand career plan. I wasn't thinking ahead very much. But then I discovered this thing called geology. And I thought, well, that sounds quite good. Geology seems to be something that combines a whole range of different topics. And for someone with the attention span of a gnat, maybe that would be something I'd still be interested in after 3 years. So I told my careers teacher, I think I want to be a geologist. And she said, oh, you don't want to do that, she said. Not really an appropriate career for a woman, she said. You do realise there are no women's toilets at the British Geological Survey, she said. Well, I risked it. So off I went to study geology. Here I am, with a hammer for scale. And during my time as an undergraduate, I was lucky enough to have a paleontologist as my tutor in my first year. And all the way through the first year, I really wasn't interested in paleontology. I admit that now. I was never a kid who loved dinosaurs and wanted to study them. No, that kind of came later. So she really had to bribe me with donuts, sometimes with gin and tonics. But I quite enjoyed this interaction with this tutor and understanding, learning about all these animals that have been around in the past. And so when she asked if I would be a research assistant for her over the summer in Quebec in Canada, I jumped at the chance. I thought that would be a really interesting thing to do. So off I went to Canada, and that's where I found this. I brought it with me, so this. So I found this fossil, 20 years ago. I could say I always carry it in my pocket, but I would be lying. I had to dig it out. Anyway, I still have it, but this is the fossil that changed my life. So up until this point, yeah, I was fairly interested in fossils, but I was really being a field assistant because it was a free ticket to Canada. And I'd never been to Canada. It sounded like quite a fun thing to do. So I spent that summer digging up lots of fossils for this tutor. And most of the fossils that she was interested in were things called graptolites, which they look like someone's written on the rock. And in fact, if you're pretty creative with a pencil, you can draw them and fool people with them, which I've never done, obviously. And I don't recommend any of my students try it either. Anyway, but one day I found this. So this is the back end of a trilobite, an animal that in life would have looked a bit like that. So what was it about this creature that drew me into the world of paleontology? Well, I looked at it, nestled in my hand, and I thought, here's a creature that itself probably only lived for a couple of years. And 420 million years later, it's still telling me something about the environment in which it lived. And that blew my mind. And that idea continues to blow my mind now. Okay? So that's really when I thought, I'll go and be a paleontologist, whatever one of those is. Still wasn't really quite sure. So I finished my degree, and I think probably due to a lack of confidence, I didn't apply to do a PhD straight away. I thought I'll go to London. Everyone goes to London, don't they, to see what the big city holds for them. So I went to London. I worked in a library for a little while. But me and libraries didn't really go that well together. I don't wear tweed very well, it turns out. And so I then thought about being an accountant for a while. And I went to a number of interviews for accountancy. And I realised that I had met nobody who, I can say that here, can't I? No one who I really respected. And so in the middle of an interview, I just said, well, I think we should stop this here because I've just realised that this is not a job I could ever possibly do. Thanks for your time. So all this while, I'm casting around for a job that I do want to do, and I realised working in the library, I enjoyed the work, I enjoyed interacting with people, it was great, but what I found was that I wasn't using my mind enough, and I think that time out from academia really made me realise that I have to use my mind, I have to think about things. And so when I saw a job opportunity at the Natural History Museum in London, I thought, well, this is a great idea, I'll apply for this. So I went for an interview, and the job was to do some kind of curatorial work on sea urchins. These are some sea urchins for you. So there I was, being interviewed. Question, so what do you know about fossil sea urchins? Cast my eye around the room. They look like they make good paperweights, I said. Anyway, the job was mine. So some of the things that I've looked at as a paleontologist, I have concentrated on sea urchins since that time. And so one of the things that I have been interested in is mass extinction events. So Janine briefly touched on this idea that many animals went extinct, and possibly this might be to do with massive volcanic eruptions. Other people think it might be to do with a big asteroid coming and hitting the planet. And so I thought, well, that we can, rather than look at dinosaurs who died at this time, they all died out. There's not a lot you can try and glean from the fact that all of them died out. If you look at some groups which are closely related to each other and only some of them die, perhaps you could find out a little bit more about why some went extinct and others survived. And so what I found was, I came up with this list of the types of things that might be correlates for extinction, so what things might benefit something or might be really nasty for something. And I went through, I looked at all the sea urchins that have been found in the world in 2 different time periods, just before the Cretaceous Tertiary boundary and just after. I looked at them all, and I kind of asked all these questions of all these different sea urchins. And what I found was the only thing that made a difference was their feeding strategy. And we can tell feeding strategy, even in fossil sea urchins, by looking at the arrangement of the plating structures around their mouth. So that's pretty cool. So we can treat these animals, these very dead animals, as if they're alive. But we don't have to deal with the smell, which is good, or the oozy bits, which is also good. So feeding strategy seemed to be the most important thing that meant that some of these animals lived and some of them died. And in fact, actually, it doesn't help us very much, because this idea of feeding strategy, a collapse in the food chain, is consistent with either dinosaurs dying this really horrible death that you see on the left-hand side here, with volcanic eruptions going on in the background. I mean, maybe they're happier here. They're having a little bath before they go, aren't they? But it's hard to tell those 2 different things apart just from this data. So second case study for you. I'm sort of interested in the evolution of larvae. I'm not sure why, but I am. I'll show you some pretty pictures. Here's a really nice array of quite attractive animals in a warm colour scheme. I think I tried hard with this, right? So, but all of these animals here have a larval stage, so they don't hatch from an egg and turn into a fully formed or just a small adult. They have a stage in between those 2 things. So some of them we're familiar with. So the frog, we can all anticipate that that's going to be a tadpole in the next picture. But did you know that these are what the larvae of all these other creatures look like? So all of these animals have larvae, and there's actually a lot of questions about larvae that biologists ask. And paleontologists haven't really asked, but they're starting to now, because actually one of the things we can do as paleontologists is give biologists some time, if you like. We can go back much further into the past and look at things that happened there. So one of the theories that marine biologists had come up with was that we see, in the present day, we see a number of different types of larvae. So we have larvae like the one at the top there. This is a sea urchin, one type of sea urchin larvae, and it can float around in the plankton and it can feed, and that means that it can live for a really long time. It can kick back, have a great time before it needs to settle down and become an adult. But other sea urchins have larvae like that one in the middle, a bit less attractive. These ones don't feed, so they need to settle down quickly so that they can grow themselves a mouth and get on with the business of feeding and all the rest of it. And then we have another sort again, which brood, and these things can be really closely related to each other. There's a lot of theory that goes along with it. So people predict that if you are one of these sea urchins that has larvae that can feed and float, then you'll have a really big geographic range, a really long species duration, and a low speciation rate. But no one had tested any of these ideas. It was all just theory. And so I thought, well, I can test that. I'll give it a go. And so I looked at sea urchins. I'm showing a picture of a living one rather than a fossil one because it's so much prettier. So this is called a tuxedo urchin. So cute. But the fossil ones, where they lose all their spines, they kind of look a bit like Fabergé eggs. I mean, they're truly beautiful little creatures. And from these types of organisms, we can work out how these things might be related to each other. And so this tree on the right-hand side here is showing you how things might be related to each other. And it's also telling you something about the order in which we think these different strategies arose. It turns out that all of those predictions that were made in theory do hold in the fossil record as well. So it's really nice when you can corroborate things like that. So just 2 more things to say, really. Paleontology sort of sits at the boundary between geology and biology. I haven't studied any biology formally since I was 16, but it hasn't held me back. I've been able to learn the things that I've needed as I've gone along. Paleontology is something that you can reach through geology or through biology. There are different routes to get there. So finally, I'd say to all of you, do what you love, not necessarily what you find easiest. So I find paleontology pretty challenging. It's certainly not the easiest thing I've done in my life. We have a really patchy fossil record. We're often having to, I won't say make stuff up, it's not quite like that, but we are often being creative in coming up with ideas that we then want to try and test. I'd also say the direct route's not always the most interesting. So if at first you can't go through the door that you want to go through, don't give up. You might be able to go through that door at a different point in your life. And then finally, you never know where your science will actually end up being published. So one of my papers I wrote for my PhD thesis ended up being cited in Terry Pratchett's Science of Discworld, which is slightly bizarre, but pretty cool. Thank you very much.